Wow, you have made it this far. Welcome to the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area. I'm so glad that you are here with us tonight. Go ahead and take that mask off, okay? It's done. Grab a cup of tea if that's valuable for you. If you'd rather have something stronger, buen provecho. Get ready. We are in for a wonderful evening of inspiring stories, inspiring people who have gone above and beyond to ensure that we respect human rights in the United States, with our neighbors, co-workers, as well as people we don't know, and maybe far beyond our borders. Thank you very much for being here and enjoying this time with us on this journey of the Human Rights Awards for 2021. As I said, you're going to be inspired, and certainly human rights are for all of us. So with that, we begin with, in fact, a very important message from the United Nations. United Nations.
The past 2 years have painfully demonstrated the intolerable cost of soaring inequalities. Equality is at the heart of human rights. That doesn't mean we must all look the same, think the same, or act the same. Quite the opposite. It means that we embrace our diversity and demand that all be treated without any kind of discrimination. That no matter who we are, who we love, or where we live, we have equal opportunities to live in dignity and to pursue our dreams. That from the moment we are born, anywhere on this planet, we have the same rights to life, health, and education, to speak our minds without fear, to enjoy our days in a healthy environment. All of us. Equality is about empathy and solidarity, about understanding that as a common humanity, our only way forward is to work together for the common good. But the inequalities inflamed by COVID-19 are pushing us backwards. It is about time we push back and bring them down. On this Human Rights Day, I invite you to join me in lending your name and your efforts to equality, so that we can recover better, fairer, and greener from this crisis, so that we can rebuild societies that are more resilient and sustainable, so that we can stand up for human rights for all.
Tonight, in many ways, has been shared and shaped by the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area, that is led by Ana Gabar, with co-chair Christian Ginest, and a committee full of force, full of energy, with ages ranging from 18 to into the 80s, of what we do and how we do to ensure that we have human rights. They were able to look at nominations, evaluate them, and really look at who would in fact round out and represent UNA-NCA very, very well. It's very exciting of who we have with us tonight, and in fact, what they have done. And as you'll see, actually, as far as our emerging leader, what is ahead too, and that potential for future. So thank you very much. With that, we're going to begin, in fact, hearing from Professor James Silk, who will be delivering the Louis B. Sohn Award. And so we're so glad to have Dr. Silk, who's the director of the Allard Lowenstein International Human Rights Clinic of the Yale Law School. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. It's a real honor for me to introduce the 2021 Louis Sohn Award winner, Tendayi Achiume. An honor to present an award named for Professor Sohn, truly the grandfather of international human rights law, admired as much for his kindness and generosity as for his brilliance, and an honor to introduce Tendayi, already similarly admired. Tendayi is my former student in the Human Rights Clinic at Yale Law School. But our relationship has gone full cycle. From just 13 years ago, when Tendayi was my brilliant student, she's become my colleague and dear friend, and now my teacher. The greatest satisfaction I think a teacher can have. We usually think of these awards being for a lifetime of achievement. Tendayi is just at the start of her career, but she's already accomplished what would be a lifetime of work for most of us. Tendayi is a beloved teacher at UCLA Law School, where among other things, she teaches the Human Rights Clinic. She's received UCLA's Distinguished Teaching Award, the university's highest honor for teaching excellence. She's a creative scholar, particularly exploring the relationship between racism and xenophobia and the treatment of refugees and other migrants. The titles of just a few of her articles, Migration as Decolonization, Governing Xenophobia, and Beyond Prejudice, Structural Xenophobic Discrimination Against Refugees, reflect both her ability to bring fresh perspective to troubled issues and her commitment to scholarship that can contribute to advancing, the protection of human rights. Somehow, while being a great and cherished teacher and writing valuable scholarly articles, she's managed to be an unusually productive and effective UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Appointed in 2017, Tendayi was the first person from Southern Africa and the first woman to assume this position. She undertook this mandate out of her commitment to combating racial injustice, and she's done it with unprecedented courage and integrity. Her reports on the impact of nationalist populism on racial equality, the impact of digital technologies on racial discrimination, the obligations of states to provide reparations for discrimination rooted in slavery and colonialism, global extractivism and racial equality, and state actions to combat the glorification of Nazism and the resurgence of anti-Semitism, to name but a few, demonstrate the timeliness, range, tough-mindedness, and creativity of her smart and powerfully persuasive reports. If Tendayi had done nothing else as Special Rapporteur, her historic statement to the UN Human Rights Council in June 2020, following the killing of George Floyd and the ensuing protests throughout the US, would give her tenure extraordinary significance. At the council session entitled Urgent Debate on the Current Racially Inspired Human Rights Violations, Systemic Racism, Police Brutality, and Violence Against Peaceful Protests, she spoke the plain truth with her singular eloquence and her understanding that repair of the enduring harms of racism requires genuine change and demands something of all of us, including the UN itself. She spoke with a frankness that broke through the usual tepid diplomatic language that typifies UN debate on even the most egregious human rights violations. I reread the statement this morning and wished I could quote vast parts of it. I'm just going to read one excerpt. Quoting, "The predominant analysis in the United States is that the problem of police violence extends to the very framework of law and policy that governs law enforcement, including transparency and accountability for human rights violations by law enforcement officials. Nevertheless, the predominant messaging from the President of the United States and his administration has been to deny the existence of systemic racism in law enforcement. Instead, he has inflamed national tensions through racialized, divisive rhetoric and calls upon public authorities to deploy force against protesters. The response of the US government to the national uprising against systemic racism in law enforcement has reenacted the very injustices that have driven people into the streets in the first place." And then she called on the UN to hold itself accountable for its failures to combat racism and racial violence. She said, "This urgent debate must mark a shift, even within the United Nations, in the fight against racial injustice to ensure that racial inequality receives the attention, political will, and resources required to achieve real and meaningful protection and promotion of human rights for people of African descent." I wanted to conclude with concrete stories that would illuminate the accomplishments and qualities that make Tendayi so worthy of this award. But I realized I'd have to tell a story about her brilliance, a story about her devotion to justice and human rights, a story about her original and critical insights into difficult issues and the value of human rights for addressing them, a story about her eloquence, a story about her wonderful sense of joy and sense of humor, and a story about her kindness and generosity. There's not time for that. So again, I just want to conclude by saying that it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce my student, my friend, my colleague, and my teacher, Tendayi Achiume.
Good evening, everyone. When the organizers asked me who I might consider to introduce me, the choice was clear. Professor Jim Silk was my formal introduction into the International Human Rights Framework. In my second semester of law school, his International Human Rights Clinic became my home, the space that made me feel that law school made sense and that set me on the professional path that I'm on today. Jim, thank you so much for being a phenomenal teacher, a mentor, a friend, and for making the time to share this special occasion with me. I'm feeling teary and I'm going to have to take a moment to just collect myself, because that introduction, I think, just is a testament to how amazing you are. I'd like to express my profound thanks to the UNA-NCA for this award. To receive an award named for Louis B. Sohn, such a towering figure of international law, is deeply humbling. Probably like many others who are engaged in human rights work, the work I do both as an academic and even as a public servant never feels like nearly enough in the face of the scale of human suffering that we seek to end. This award is inspiring to me because Louis Sohn is a reminder of the transformative power of a life dedicated to a more just international order. That said, I cannot lay claim to this award as an individual. This award is not about me personally, and I think that's a good thing. First, the work that I do as Special Rapporteur is the tip of a massive iceberg comprised of millions of people around the world whose daily experience is characterized by fighting against racial subordination. From the Black feminist movement in Brazil to Indigenous and Afro-descendant Colombians to the movement for Black Lives, or Mi Gente, the quotidian, dangerous, and even fatal work of fighting against racial and xenophobic injustice is work that is being done by groups and individuals who will never receive recognition for their work. I view my role as Special Rapporteur to be to provide a platform that brings attention to the many who are doing the real work of remaking our world on more equal terms. There's a second sense in which I mean that this award is not about me. The decision to honor me in my capacity as the UN Special Rapporteur on Racism strikes me as a decision on the part of the UNA-NCA to signal the importance and the urgency of the global fight against racial and xenophobic injustice, including within the UN. This is a fight that has for far too long been marginalized, especially by powerful states such as the US within the United Nations. But it's a fight that must take center stage, and I thank the UNA-NCA for its recognition of the urgency of this fight. As 2021 comes to a close, I'm still reflecting on the course that 2020 set in motion. From a racial justice perspective, the world witnessed the largest transnational anti-racism mobilization of all time, as people took to the streets to name and stand up against racism. Over 600 human rights organizations petitioned the UN Human Rights Council to hold an emergency session on racial police brutality in the United States. And in this regard, they achieved a historic success. But if 2020 was a high point for global mobilization on racial justice, it was also a low point. Powerful UN member states, the UN included, defeated the draft of resolution that would have established a mechanism for international accountability for systemic racism and policing in the United States. 2020 was also a low point in terms of how vividly the persistence of race as a structure of inequality was manifest. As I note in my recent report to the General Assembly, In the United States, Native American, Latino, and Black people have a COVID-19 mortality rate double the rate of white Americans. In Brazil, Afro-Brazilians are 1.5 times more likely to die of the disease. In the United Kingdom, women of African descent and men of African descent were respectively 4.3 and 4.2 times more likely to die of COVID-19 than white people, the largest disparity of any ethnic group. Yet at the close of 2021, a reality that has aptly been described as vaccine apartheid is firmly in pace. As the West hoards vaccines and their patents, racially marginalized communities experience preventable deaths. All of this is to say, the fight for equality remains as urgent as ever. To the UNA-NCA, I say, please continue to do the important work you're doing to call attention to the role of the international system in combating racial injustice. The memo published in September 2020 by the UNA-NCA entitled Equality, Dignity, and Rights, the UN, the US, and Anti-Racism is one example. And for those of you who have not read it, I encourage you to do so for its succinct overview of the UN and anti-racism with a focus on racial justice in the United States. In closing, I want to acknowledge the people who make it possible for me to do the work that I do. My staff in Geneva, my current and former research and advocacy fellows, my colleagues and current and former students at UCLA School of Law, some of whom I know are attending, thank you for coming. And perhaps most importantly, my family. And I want to dedicate this award to every single person whose life has been permanently altered by racial or xenophobic injustice. Thank you very much.
Tendayi Achiume, thank you so very much for your very, very important words as we consider where we are. I appreciate that you specifically spoke about that, yes, you are receiving the award. Yes, we will put it actually in your hands. I know that you are out of the country tonight and right now. But also that in fact the award belongs to so many people across the globe that you have fought with and for on behalf of, and how very important that is in the process. Certainly right now with COVID, and as you identify, vaccine apartheid, there are huge issues and obstacles where racism is visible in so many, many different ways, as you have noted. It is a global fight that we see as urgent within the United Nations Association, the National Capital Area, to address racism and xenophobia. You have helped us highlight that tonight. Our work continues step by step. And within that too, thank you very much to Professor James Silk for your opening words in the process. Let's focus specifically now on gender and the Perdita Huston Rights Award. We will hear from Lyric Thompson, who is the Senior Director for Policy and Advocacy within the International Center for Research on Women. Please go ahead, Lyric.
Hello, good evening, and it's such a pleasure to be back at a UNA-NCA Human Rights Awards, although I do regret that we're not in person. I was a very proud board member for a number of years when I lived in Washington, D.C., and was delighted to be part of the work of the Advocacy Committee, which is, of course, the next honorees remit as well. It's when Gayatri reached out to me to see if I would present this award, I was so thrilled because it's very special to me for two reasons. One, because Gayatri is herself the single most talented and lovely advocate I've ever had the pleasure of working with in my career. But also because this award is very special to me insofar as it has been for many years people I deeply respect in the field, and I feel that I myself kind of came up at the knee of Karen Mulhauser, who worked to endow, and begin this award for the women's rights advocacy. So there's a long line of incredibly prestigious awardees that have come before you, Gayatri, and you are continuing that tradition with such style and grace and such important contributions. Let me tell you about a few of them. So the way that I like to think of the work and the style and substance of the work that we do is along two axes. And you have the pleasure in this work to work with a number of incredibly competent and brilliant people. And that is a treat and a joy in itself. You also sometimes have the opportunity to work with people who are truly lovely human beings, but it's very rare that you get to work with someone who's a standout on both of those axes. And I can't think of anyone who scores higher in either category than Gayatri. So on the substance piece, let me share with you a few of her many important contributions to the work. I met Gayatri in 2016 when she was hired as the Gender Advocacy Director at CARE, and became my co-chair in the Advocacy Coalition Girls Not Brides USA. Before that, there were a number of important contributions that she had made in her career at the State Department, working on humanitarian issues, trafficking, doing consular work in Cairo, and doing just a number of amazing things that I wish I had known her then. But then from 2016 to present, our work together as advocates in the gender and foreign policy space has included the following key contributions from Gayatri. One, the world's first adolescent girl strategy. So a piece of foreign policy that was completely tailored around the rights and needs of adolescent girls who are typically overlooked, even in the gender justice space. So that was truly world changing and defining in that policy. And that was definitely her work as co-chair. And that was launched by Secretary of State Kerry and impacted a number of agencies, and is still something that we utilize to this day, and other countries have followed suit. Then in the Trump administration, there was, I think, an opportunity for more creative thinking on how to advance women's human rights in a context that was at the very least unexpected, at the most outright hostile on our issues. And Gayatri was the brilliant thought partner who took a look at the landscape and was able to help found and lead a coalition on women's economic empowerment and equality, which she rightly recognized was the issue that we might attract interest from the Trump administration. And remember, this was also a Republican-controlled Senate, House, and White House. And there was no advocacy coalition space on that issue, but there was high interest on that issue. So the thinking there was there might be good ground to be broken. And there might also be, that might also be an umbrella issue under which we could sort of, for lack of a better word, hide some of the other women's rights programs and contributions, and protect them from attack in the event that the worst would come to pass. Within that time period, Gayatri herself led the work of drafting, whipping, introducing, and ultimately securing passage of legislation on small and micro and medium enterprises that expanded USAID authority to do work there in 8 months. Typically, legislation takes 8 years to go from start to finish. And while it was a coalition effort, and obviously our champions on the Hill were active, that was Gayatri was the strategist behind all of that. It moved incredibly quickly. It was incredibly, it was not without its moments of challenge, both within the coalition umbrella and then in the broader community, to ensure that there were no poison pills that were added to the legislation, to deal strategically with a Senate hold, which is a formality that can prevent a piece of legislation from advancing if a particular senator has an opposition. She was the strategist and the genius behind all of that, and it worked. And in fact, I teach a course on effective advocacy at George Washington University's Elliott School. And the best part of that course is having policymakers come in and talk about what worked for them in influential campaigns. And I had a member from a very conservative Republican office in a very conservative state come in and asked him the question, what was the best piece of advocacy you've ever observed? What took you from no to yes on an issue, a women's rights issue that surprised you? And he said, I don't know if you know the advocate at CARE, Gayatri Patel, but she came into my office. I'd never heard of the bill in question that she wanted us to sponsor. I'd never heard of the issues. She had done all of her homework on why this issue, why the policy problem existed and needed to be fixed with this legislation, and why my boss was the man to do it, and took all the work off my plate. And that was, I think, truly a masterclass in strategic and effective advocacy. I'd be remiss if I didn't close with just a brief comment on the other side of the axis, which is the just beautiful human being that Gayatri is. And I know, at least speaking for myself and so many others in this space, as we contend with really difficult issues, and it seems like everything is all happening at once and you get stressed and you get overwhelmed, it is easy to lose sight of the work. It is easy to lose sight. It is easy to lose energy, confidence, to not be your best self if you're feeling overwhelmed by all the things. And I've never in my life worked with someone who is so flawlessly graceful, who takes time, even though she's always completely overworked, to pause and make sure that her partners are okay. I was sick in North Carolina several years ago, and she's the kind of person who actually bakes cookies and sends you soup through the mail, which I didn't even know was possible. So my hope for you, Gayatri, is that I know that you will only continue to be recognized and awarded for your incredible substantive contributions to this work. My hope for you is that you get back in some small degree the great amount of grace and love and joy and delight that you put into the world, because you greatly deserve it. Congratulations.
Wow, thank you, Lyric. I'm blown away by that beautiful and generous introduction. I might even need to take a minute. It has been such an absolute delight to work with you. I've truly learned so much about how to be a strong advocate and a leader through your example. And, certainly your optimism, your friendship throughout some of those dark days that you mentioned earlier have certainly kept me and so many others going throughout this work. And I appreciate you. I appreciate every ounce of energy you bring to our collective work on gender equality. I'm also deeply grateful to UNA-NCA for selecting me for this award. For those of you who haven't yet had the pleasure and privilege to work with Jill and Paula and Anna and the Human Rights Committee and the entire UNA-NCA team, you should know that their deep dedication to human rights, peace, and global cooperation is truly at the core of everything that they do. Their work to elevate the UN as an institution and human rights and sustainable development as goals really drives us all towards a more peaceful world. I want to echo the thanks for Karen Mulhauser for originally nominating me for this award. I've gotten the chance to get to know Karen more over the past year, and she truly lives up to her motto, which is advocacy is my middle name. She is the epitome of deep dedication, fierce advocacy for women's rights, and she shows up, whether it's to a coalition meeting, a community human rights initiative, or an award ceremony like this. She is there to lead and to support and to elevate others around her. So Karen, I am deeply grateful for your example and for your support. I'd like to thank all of the people who have shaped my career. Ambassador Mark Lagon, former Assistant Secretary Ann Richard, Michelle Nunn, Sophia Spreckman, and all my friends at CARE, former colleagues at the State Department, and all of the colleagues that I have the privilege to work with at the Women's Refugee Commission now, as well as in the gender advocacy community. I really want to thank my family. My very first inspiration for gender equality and women's rights were my parents, who always stress that there's absolutely nothing a woman cannot accomplish if she puts her mind to it. They were also my first example of hard work and sacrifice and humility. My father was the first of his family to immigrate to the US, and my mother worked during the day and earned her PhD at night. For them, my education and ability to succeed as an independent woman always came first. Similarly, my sisters proved through their examples that working hard and honing your talent are what truly matter in achieving success, not your gender. I'd also like to thank my father-in-law, Nagy Hamid, who passed away this past spring. He was proud of all of his children's accomplishments, and I'd like to think that he would be proud of this one too. I want to thank my husband, who has been my most diligent supporter for nearly 20 years. He was there when my passion for gender equality as a career first sparked. He painstakingly edited the first research paper I wrote on sexual violence as a weapon of war. He helped me pack my bags for my first overseas trip with the State Department to assess human trafficking in South Asia. He encouraged me through my first day prosecuting domestic violence in DC, and he has both celebrated and lamented with me through all of the roller coaster ups and downs of gender advocacy over the years. I'm grateful to have him as a partner. And finally, I want to thank my daughter, Camilla, and my son, Zaid. I've never lacked purpose or motivation in striving for gender equality, but you two give it a face and a soul. You are what's on my mind when I'm pushing for a world free from gender discrimination. It's for you that I champion reproductive justice, marriage equality, and LGBTQ rights, bodily autonomy, and freedom from all forms of gender-based violence. It is your future I was thinking of last week during the Supreme Court's review of abortion rights and the horrific tragedy of gun violence in Michigan. I think about my children a lot when I work, and I think about other people's children too. I wonder if what I'm doing will make a difference so that a young girl across the world, or even here in the US, can continue going to school rather than having her dreams dead end at child marriage. Or if a law that my colleagues and I write can really stop a young woman from being raped during war. Or if an economic empowerment program that we push for can truly help a woman earn an income and gain the independence she needs to leave an abusive spouse. I regularly wonder whether advocacy makes a difference in people's lives. But then I'm always reminded that people speaking up and demanding justice and respect for human rights is what drives us all towards a brighter, safer, and more equal future. It's a recognition that the laws, policies, and programs that we advocate for must reflect our values as a society, and that those values must be rooted in human rights and dignity of all individuals. When they fall short, our job as advocates is to raise the alarm, to organize, to speak up and make space for those who are not being heard, to do everything we can humanly do to make sure no one gets left behind. It may be idealistic, but as former President Barack Obama said, hope is not blind optimism. It's not ignoring the enormity of the task ahead or the roadblocks that stand in our path. It's not sitting on the sidelines or shirking from a fight. Hope is that thing inside us that insists, despite all evidence to the contrary, that something better awaits us if we have the courage to reach for it and work for it and fight for it. And there's so much to fight for and work for when it comes to achieving gender justice around the world. As we gather here, Afghan women in all their resilience and strength are working to maintain even the basic levels of food, cash, and security against the backdrop of a humanitarian crisis that is fueled by conflict, COVID, and drought. And to be clear, their already dire situation is worsened by gender inequality. Their access to life-saving healthcare, food, nutrition, and livelihoods is stymied by those who believe that women should not be allowed in public without a male guardian. Decades of gains in securing their rights to education, political participation, and economic inclusion have been rolled back, and they are again excluded from power and decision-making. In Ethiopia, Tigrayan women and other girls are being raped, not as a consequence, but rather as a direct tool of conflict. Young girls, older women, pregnant women have faced this horrific violence. Their physical and psychological trauma is deep, yet they are blocked from accessing the life-saving support they need, including sexual and reproductive health services and psychosocial care. It's truly painful to hear their stories, but we cannot look away and we can't stand silent. I'm proud that the organization I work for, the Women's Refugee Commission, worked with leaders in Congress to just yesterday introduce a resolution condemning these acts of sexual violence and calling for the US and partners to use all resources available to bring an end to this violence and support survivors. These examples are current events, but this fight for gender justice is one that is generations deep. My grandmother was married by the age of 15 and didn't get a chance to finish high school, but she wasn't voiceless. She was a frontline activist against colonial rule in India and a dedicated community volunteer. She was a matriarch whose quiet strength and unwavering support led to her daughters, granddaughters, and great-granddaughters all earning a higher education, being leaders in their fields, and opening doors for other women around them. Across generations, millions of women get up every day to make the world a better place for other women, and their work should motivate us all on this path. These change makers should be celebrated for their commitment, vision, and hope for a brighter future. Change makers like Sunita Christian of Prajwala, who has dedicated her life to supporting sex-trafficked women and girls in India, and whose shelter in Hyderabad has inspired me to see formerly exploited girls as the survivors and leaders that they are. Like Therese, a mother of 6 in rural Rwanda, who lifted herself out of poverty through a village savings group, and who is now a change agent for women in her community as part of CARE's gender equality and women's empowerment program to advance women's economic independence and tackle the social norms underpinning domestic violence. Or like Perdita Huston, a journalist, women's rights activist, and author who spent her lifetime giving voice to the lives and experiences of women around the world. I am honored and truly, truly humbled to receive an award bearing her name. In closing, I'd like to thank and applaud all of the recipients of this award in years past. Your dedication to human rights, combined with the work of these millions of change makers across the world, is part of a movement for social justice. I am privileged to be part of that movement and grateful to work alongside you. Thank you.
Well, Gayatri Patel, certainly Perdita Huston awardee, you have given us so much to think about of the generational scope as we consider gender and how we look at things through the years and who makes a difference in our lives. Very much, hooray, advocacy does make a difference. It does, and it takes many, many forms, including working in Congress, including working in the streets and in our own neighborhoods. Thank you so much for your work, specifically on women in Afghanistan, in Tigray, within Ethiopia, and so far beyond. I'm very glad to have you here. So thankful that Lyric Thompson was able to introduce you as well. You know, within UNA-NCA, one of the things that I'm always reminded about is how multidimensional our lives are, how we have multiple layers of identities, skills, connections that absolutely fit in the whole, as you've just heard of all the different impactors that Gayatri mentioned within her presentation. So this last year, we found another layer of that within UNA-NCA. The Graduate Fellows Program is an initiative that takes master's students and doctoral students and introduces them over the course of a semester to professionals across the UN system as well as those that have represented the United States. One of those people who was in this last year, 2021 spring session, was in fact Karen Yang. She's also a professional concert pianist. She's going to be joining us now from Seoul, I believe, where she has been based during COVID, to provide for us a piano break. Thank you very much, Karen. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this evening. It is my great honor to participate in this meaningful event as we commemorate the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As a musician, human rights mean a lot to me because I always want to share my music to benefit those who listen to it, with a hope that it would enrich their lives no matter what situations they are in. As we celebrate this evening, and as we wait for the most festive season of the year, I will present my arrangement of Debussy's Bullet Piano. I hope you all enjoy the music, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Karen Yang, thank you very much for sharing your musical talents with us, as well as your international relations focus with your career. Thank you so very much. You know, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was established in 1948, with the help of Eleanor Roosevelt, many other strong women and men, in fact, what was defined in the Declaration has been the inspiration of additional definitions on human rights. And through that, has led to various treaties, such as race discrimination, CERD, such as CEDAW on women, such as CRPD on people with disabilities, and the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Not surprisingly, as time has moved on since 1948, LGBTQ issues have come to us as well, and we recognize those as human rights issues impacting everyone. With that, I'm very glad that we have the Community Human Rights Award tonight, and it will be introduced by the board chair of SMYAL, Rob Cogorno. Please go ahead, Rob. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Jill. Appreciate that very much. Just off script for a second, I just want to say I am truly humbled to be a part of this evening. The talent and dedication, music-wise, legal-wise, advocacy-wise, has been really inspiring. So just thank you for including SMYAL and as part of this incredible presentation. Again, my name is Rob Cogorno. I'm proud to be introducing SMYAL tonight as the 2021 United Nations Association National Capital Areas Community Human Rights Award recipient. I'm very proud to serve as the chair of SMYAL's board of directors, where I have the privilege of witnessing firsthand the tremendous amount of dedication and passion that goes into SMYAL's work. SMYAL stands for Supporting and Mentoring Youth Advocates and Leaders. It was founded 37 years ago to provide safe and affirming spaces to young LGBTQ people in our community. In the decades since its founding, the needs of our youth have evolved, but the mission has remained constant: to empower queer and trans youth. When I think about the ways in which SMYAL serves the LGBTQ youth in our community, it is clear that this work is absolutely about securing, increasing, and protecting human rights. Just as the LGBTQ community itself is intersectional, comprising people from across abilities, racial, religious, economic, educational, familial, national identities, SMYAL's work has to be, by definition, intersectional, understanding that no single member of our community is affected the same way as another by social or political factors. SMYAL's work is not just to reduce inequalities in the lives of LGBTQ youth, it also centers on equipping these young people with the tools they will need to be leaders in their own communities, to be the real change agents for social justice and change, such as some of the incredibly inspiring people that have already spoken and been honored here tonight. Local organizations like SMYAL are a real access point for young people in our communities to get involved with human rights work. Thank you to the UN Association National Capital Area for recognizing the work of our local organizations and its mission by honoring SMYAL tonight. With that, I'd like to introduce to everyone Sultan Shaker, who has been our executive director for about 7 years now, who will explain a little bit more about the work. And there are no superlatives I can use to describe Sultan's leadership and what he has meant to the organization and the growth in the services that we've been able to provide, especially over the last 3-4 years. So with that, I'll end, and Sultan, take it away.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you to the United Nations Association National Capital Area for recognizing SMYAL as this year's Community Award recipient. We really appreciate it. And we're honored to be included in this year with the other awardees who are working across the country and the globe to advocate for and to secure human rights. And as Rob mentioned, my name is Sultan Sakir. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm honored to be accepting this award on behalf of SMYAL this evening. And so SMYAL started as a few chairs in a circle in a church basement. And we were founded in 1984 when LGBTQ youth were being institutionalized at St. Elizabeth's Psychiatric Hospital in Southeast DC for not fitting societal norms of masculinity or femininity. And at the time, the community came together to create a space where LGBTQ people could be welcomed and accepted. And so during its first year, SMYAL provided youth and their families with access to supportive professionals. And as the AIDS epidemic ravaged the district and the country and the world, SMYAL started conducting HIV awareness and prevention programs and facilitated youth socialization and support groups to reduce isolation. And then later in '97, SMYAL founded its first permanent home as we purchased 2 adjacent row homes in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of DC. And that really enabled SMYAL to dramatically expand its hours of operations, offer after-school programs, and create a space where young people could come and gather with their community. And as Rob mentioned, the society around LGBT youth has changed. Their needs have evolved, but that doesn't mean the work is no longer needed. It just means that it's changed. And so LGBTQ youth still account for 40% of the population of youth experiencing homelessness, both here in DC and nationally. And only 26% of queer and trans youth say they always feel safe in their school classrooms. And just 5% say that all of their teachers and school staff are supportive of LGBTQ people. And so another stat is that 70% of LGBTQ youth stated that their mental health was poor most of the time or always during COVID-19. And that's a lot. And so how can we expect a young person to access their right to quality education when they don't feel included in their curriculum or safe in their classroom? How do we ensure that LGBTQ youth stay connected to healthcare when they're worried about where they're going to sleep that night? SMYAL's mission to empower LGBTQ youth is the foundation for our work, which aims to meet the most basic needs of queer and trans young people, from providing stable, affirming housing to supporting their mental and physical health needs, to their need for community and support. SMYAL's work is comprehensive and holistic because it has to be. We work in schools, training teachers and administrators how to be better allies for LGBT students in the classroom. We partner with organizations across the community to advocate for LGBTQ specific funding in the DC budget, to reduce inequities and create opportunities like employment programs for transgender youth who we know face higher discrimination in the workplace. We train cohorts of youth sex educators to be accessible resources for their peers and empower them to take control of their health. And we believe that queer and trans young people deserve affirming, empowering spaces wherever they go, because it's their right to exist in all spaces, free from discrimination. And this year alone, thanks to our incredible community of supporters and partners, SMYAL has been able to deepen our impact as we further expand this work. And since SMYAL first opened our youth housing program in 2017, it's never just been about providing beds or stable shelter, as important as that is. It's also about seeing each young person who comes into our program as an individual and ensuring that their individual needs are met. And so SMYAL's approach to providing housing to queer and trans youth is intentionally designed to tailor our services to the needs of each young person who comes through our doors. And earlier this year, we opened a new iteration of our housing program called Romance House. And it's our extended transitional housing program, which helps youth who need more time to build a stable foundation. And we provide up to 6 years of case management, job training, and support to really help young people transition from homelessness to insecurity. And later this year, we'll be launching what's called a rapid rehousing program for youth who are ready for that next level of independence and want to sign their name to a lease on their own apartment, with us there to financially and emotionally support them in this transition. And even though there's no direct route to sustainable independence, we'll be with our youth every step of the way, thanks largely to the support of so many people in the broader community. In addition, over the pandemic, queer and trans youth have embraced taking care of their mental health, oftentimes having to overcome feelings of social isolation, concerns of job loss, threats of eviction and homelessness. Even then, getting the help they deserve has often been out of reach. A lot of people face long wait lists to see a therapist, a short supply of culturally competent clinicians, or even high financial barriers. And we knew the need was there, so we asked ourselves, how can we be there? And that's when the Clinical Services Department was born. It was born to create a space that provides queer and trans youth with affirming mental health care, where they don't have to worry about how they're going to pay for it or have to educate their therapist on LGBTQ issues. They can instead just focus on themselves. And so by offering one-on-one counseling, to group therapy sessions, to healing therapies like yoga and sound healing, we'll be able to work with up to 50 youth a week. And this program would not be possible without the incredible support and funding we've received from a number of organizations around DC and increasingly around the country. And I just want to take a moment to close by recognizing the strength and resilience of the young people we work with every day, for whom this work is really about. They're the leaders of not just tomorrow, but of today. And they deserve support, resources, and platforms that center and uplift their voices. They deserve access to spaces that not just give them a seat at a table, but allow them to be a critical part of the decision-making process. And through leadership development programs like our annual Rise Up Youth Organizing Conference, our Youth Leadership Award scholarship programs, or our hands-on youth fellowships, SMYAL seeks to equip young people with the tools they need to be advocates, leaders, and change makers. And SMYAL was founded by our community. We're still around because of our community. And I know that the young people we serve and work with every day will continue this vital work, pouring back into their own communities, which is why I'm proud to accept the Community Advocate Award from the UNA-NCA on behalf of SMYAL today. So thank you.
Sultan Shakir, congratulations, SMYAL, for serving the community so well in Washington, D.C. and beyond, and truly for then earning the Community Award on Human Rights. So thank you so much. Thank you too to Rob Cogorno, who introduced you. Leaders of today, yeah, that fits exactly with, in fact, our work within the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area. That piece of starting actually at middle school, ranging through then doctoral programs, helping young people have their voice and involvement as we look ahead. Certainly with human rights, we know it's not limited based on who one is or what their sexual orientation or gender identity is. Thank you, SMYAL, for doing what you do to make life better. With that, we now move over to the F. Allen Tex Harris Diplomacy Award. Tex was a giant in so many ways. He was a stalwart member of the United Nations Association. He worked so very hard as far as diplomacy, whether that had to do with working in the field, and particularly then in Argentina, but elsewhere during his career with the U.S. Department of State. It's actually an honor that we have Professor Harold Koh with us tonight. He's the Sterling Professor of International Law at Yale Law School. Harold Koh also is formerly with the U.S. Department of State, and I would suspect actually worked with Tex Harris. With that, Harold Koh, I leave it to you.
Thank you. I'm not able to start my video, so if somebody could help me to unblock that. I'll just proceed without the video. I'm thrilled to join you in honoring Lynn Sicade, who I've known for more than 20 years, starting when I served as Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor in the Clinton administration, and later as State Department legal advisor and senior advisor in the Obama and Biden administrations. In each of these capacities, I witnessed Lynn's patriotism, intelligence, drive, and courage in fighting for human rights in multilateral fora. Lynn first came to DRL by way of El Salvador, where she had served in the Foreign Service before converting to civil service. My friend and principal deputy, Leslie Gerson, told me that Lynn had the most profound moral and personal commitment to human rights. And I saw that immediately as we worked together on the draft resolution on Indigenous peoples as well as in finally securing US support for the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which was a huge bureaucratic lift that Lynn helped to bring to completion. During the second Bush administration, she began her pioneering work on freedom of peaceful assembly and association, which was interrupted when the Bush administration left the Human Rights Council. But when the Obama administration came back in, she helped revive that effort by crafting the action memo, the pioneering council resolution, and the grand strategy to get it through by consensus over the resistance of China, Russia, and other naysayers. During 4 different administrations, Lynn ran point on country resolutions before the council, most significantly the resolution on Cuba, and helped reestablish the relationships needed to resolve differences with Mexico and other OAS countries. And when the Human Rights Council introduced the idea of a universal periodic review for all countries, regardless of whether they're members of the council, Lynn was one of the most forceful internal proponents for the unpopular notion that the US should subject its own human rights record to UN review, even if we weren't members of the council. Under her watchful eye, the US continued to make interventions on every other country and built momentum for us to be willing to appear ourselves. She pressed the Bush administration to defeat the notorious slanted resolution condemning the defamation of religions, which finally came to fruition during the Obama administration. She was so creative and innovative in using procedural rules to force action on controversial country situations like Sri Lanka. And against great resistance, she fought consistently for a stronger US position on economic, social, and cultural rights. During the darkest days of the Trump administration, Lynn Sicade helped keep America's human rights flame burning. She fought successfully to prevent backsliding of the US position for LGBT rights and against torture. And in the Biden administration, she once again stands at the forefront of our multilateral human rights efforts. Over the years, my admiration for Lynn has only deepened. Through her sustained commitment, she's become a worthy successor to Tex Harris, for whom this award is named. Throughout a distinguished 35-year career, Tex became a legend. Now, unlike Lynn, Lynn, unlike Tex, is not from Texas, and she doesn't happen to be 6'7" tall, but she's a giant in many other ways. She has the same impressive spirit, intellect, and tireless energy. And fighting for human rights at the State Department doesn't make you popular. Tex himself admitted he was, quote, a joyful contrarian who, quote, made a career out of being a pain. Don't worry, Lynn, no one's ever said that about you, at least to your face. But as Tex observed, American diplomats who have the bureaucratic courage to stand up for what is right are the first line of defense for this country. They're out there protecting everyone with no body armor, no sidearms, no weapons, in every place, protecting US interests and citizens. So like Tex Harris, my friend, the gutsy, brave, dedicated, persistent Lynn Sicade is a human rights warrior. Every day she shows us what dedicated professional human rights diplomats can achieve against internal resistance and external opposition. It is because she so exemplifies the very best human rights traditions of the US Civil and Foreign Service that she so richly deserves the 2021 Tex Harris Human Rights Diplomacy Award. Thank you, and Lynn, over to you.
Thank you, Harold. I really appreciate that you're introducing me. I can remember the days when there was a line of people outside of your office waiting to ask you a question about a specific international law point on human rights, and you always had a cogent, concise, and compassionate answer, and inspired us all to do better. You were my first Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. It's hard to believe that was 20 years ago. Thank you also to Jill and Paula, Anna, Andrew, Sasha, Mason, Alex, and the members of the DC chapter of the UN Association. I am deeply honored. Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the historical figures who is deeply inspiring to me, said of human rights, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college she attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerned citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. I began my career in diplomatic service in El Salvador, a country that at the time was mired in civil war and where human rights violations and abuses were rife. But as a consular officer, my job was really to adjudicate visa applications. It could be a wrenching job when you saw people who were hungering to leave and begin a better life, where their neighborhood had become unbearable in no small part because of human rights violations and abuses. As I moved through my posts, I worked on the country report on the human rights situation in London. Easy job, right? At the time, the troubles had not ended, and I remember hearing a bomb early one morning as I was preparing for work. The troubles, as the British called it, referred to the sectarian asymmetrical conflict in Northern Ireland. As the human rights report included Northern Ireland, it was a more complicated thing to draft than one might have thought at first glance. In this job, I learned to appreciate just how much discrimination can drive conflict and so deeply affect human rights. My next posting, I worked on the Peru-Ecuador border conflict and had the pleasure of learning from Luigi Einaudi. He taught me the fundamentals of successful diplomacy. It is both easier and harder than you might imagine. Listen. Really listening is a skill, as is writing a one-page memo or a concise diplomatic report or a strategy. I thank Luigi for teaching me the tools of the craft. When my first boss in the Foreign Service called me to ask me to come and work in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, I had to consider it. I had thought my career would move toward peacemaking, but I took the job and I began to realize that peacemaking begins in small places, close to home, in neighborhoods, and that where there is not justice, opportunity, dignity, peace is a distant dream. We knew this in 1945 when in the wake of World War II and its horrors, the UN was created. We knew it in 1948 when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. We often forget the preamble of the UDHR. I find the first sentence to be the most powerful statement in the UDHR. Whereas the recognition of inherent integrity and of equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. It's been my honor to contribute to human rights norms and standards in the UN, working on country resolutions that highlight and call out human rights abuses and violations can at first blush seem to be like a slap on the wrist of genocideers. But I did learn early that those words have meaning to people who are being imprisoned and to the relatives of slain human rights defenders, and that governments do respond to criticism. I fought to retain strong international human rights standards for freedom of expression, and over 2 administrations worked to create a new special rapporteur on the freedom of peaceful assembly and association. And I thank Mike Kozak, Eileen Donahoe, and Dan Baer for their consistent support of that effort. It was my pleasure to work on promoting and protecting the rights of marginalized people, particularly leading US support for the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to contributing to the establishment of a special rapporteur on the rights of LGBTQI+ people. And it was a wonderful experience to help my friends Arsalan Suleiman, Evelyn Aswad, and Krista McGeaney create the Istanbul process, which aims to provide a forum for the best practices to combat stigmatization and discrimination on account of religious belief. And as Harold mentioned, he and I worked with Mike Posner to bring the US on board on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. When I look back on that and I reflect, I think about Eleanor Roosevelt's observation, the neighborhoods I lived in, the individuals I worked with. I lived in the Seattle area during the fishing wars, in New Orleans in the early 70s, and in San Diego at the height of the discussion of immigration in California. These experiences have given me some unique personal insights when dealing with diplomats abroad who sometimes seem to enjoy needling the US. What I learned in 20+ years of engagement on human rights is that acknowledging the shortcomings of our own country, while also discussing our strong protections for fundamental freedoms, is a strength. We can talk about the Trail of Tears at the same time we praise academic freedom. Without that academic freedom, many of us would not have learned about the Trail of Tears, what happened to the Cherokee in Georgia. We can discuss racial inequality openly while noting that the world knows so much about race relations in the United States because of our transparency and press freedom. And I will never forget the conversation with African ambassadors at the Palais des Nations in Geneva when they insisted that Barack Obama would never be elected president of the United States. I also won't forget the look on their faces when we did elect Barack Obama as president of the United States. Our country remains capable of surprising the world with progress we can make and surprising the world when we fail. As diplomats, we share the discomfort of our fellows when our flaws are exposed, while also urging other diplomats to be transparent, to seek accountability, and to press for respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms of all people. That's the job of a US diplomat who has dedicated the majority of their career to human rights. It can be frustrating and highly rewarding, as Tex Harris exemplified throughout his career, from fighting for the mothers of the plaza, who sought transparency and accountability for their disappeared loved ones, to his teaching at the Foreign Service Institute, where I was lucky enough to hear him speak about his experiences. Tex Harris knew, as I do, none of us do this work alone. I have a long list of people to thank. I start at home with my family, my brother Rob and my parents, and particularly my wife Amber, who has put up with long hours and travel. And I move to my office, from teachers like Mike Kozak and Harold Coe to an array of talented bosses like Leslie Gerson, Scott Busby, Lisa Peterson, Erica Barks-Rogels, Mark Legon, and Julieta Valls-Noyes, and to my colleagues in the International Organizations Bureau and the Legal Office. I most especially recognize the teamwork of my own office. Every individual who's come through multilateral and global affairs has contributed. I can't name them all, but I do want to recognize my team leader for multilateral affairs, Lana Sala, without whom we could not have the successes we currently have. I would also like to recognize Laura de la Rambellier, Malika Yetkin, Sarah Creedon, and Krista McGinney. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the multitude of civil society activists and foreign diplomats who have supported initiatives like establishing the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and Association. To them and to you, I thank you.
Lynn Sicade, one of your colleagues just said, we are lucky to have you. I would like to consider that writ large. We as Americans, we as those in the world are very lucky that you have been doing what you've been doing over these years. Your words, as well as an introduction from Harold Coe, show the perseverance, the creativity, the vision that you have had, and knowing too that at times it means reckoning and acknowledging our own faults, our own missteps in history, as we aim to move ahead to ensure the human rights of all. Congratulations on your award. We're so glad. And so now we have actually a new award. This year, with the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area, we have an Emerging Human Rights Leader Award that we are inaugurating. It's tremendous, and certainly it is absolutely within the realm of our organization of respecting and honoring the voices and experiences of those who are younger. So not just honoring seasoned diplomats, but those that are emerging and growing throughout as we begin work with young people, again, at, in fact, the very earliest ages of school. So with that, I'm going to pass this to our CEO of the United Nations Association, United Capital Area, who also then leads the United Nations Association of the United States, and that is Paula Boland, who is an incredible visionary leader for all of us. Paula, please go ahead and introduce our awardee.
Thank you very much, Jill, for that warm introduction. And good evening, everyone. This keeps getting better and better. It is now my distinct honor to introduce the first inaugural UNA-NCA Emerging Leader Human Rights Award to my dear colleague and friend, Ryan Kaminski, who brings over a decade of experience advocating for human rights, sustainable development, and international public policy. I met Ryan several years ago as I joined UNA USA's National Council and worked closely with the national team. At the time, Ryan was serving as the Leo Neva's Human Rights Fellow, and later as Senior Program Manager for Human Rights and Policy Advisor for the UN Foundation. I remember fondly to this day when we both joined the UNA USA delegation to the World Federation of UN Associations meeting in British Columbia, Canada, and Ryan was leading the growing movement of youth leaders. During his tenure at the UN Association and UN Foundation, Ryan played a critical role overseeing high-level advocacy and building effective cross-sector partnerships and campaigns with a focus on LGBTQI+ human rights, the SDGs, and US-UN relations. He worked to build bridges with hundreds of UNA USA grassroots advocates across the country and UN human rights mechanisms, such as the UN Human Rights Council and the Universal Periodic Review. Our chapter, through its Human Rights Committee, was actively involved in UPR efforts, conducting educational forums and research with local partners. And Ryan provided critical guidance and support every step of the way. Ryan also briefed congressional members and staffers on developments in the UN human rights system. And for his early age as a young professional, he has authored and co-published several reports and articles on topics including human rights, US foreign policy, and international institutions. During his time at the World Benchmarking Alliance, Ryan led the organization's multilateral advocacy strategy with the goal of holding the world's most influential corporations accountable to the Sustainable Development Goals and human rights standards. This included leading the organization in the engagement at the UN High-Level Political Forum, UN General Assembly, and at the UN Human Rights Council, where he worked regularly with diplomats, business leaders, human rights advocates, and other international decision makers. He is currently serving as the LGBTQI+ advisor at the US Agency for International Development, Inclusive Development Hub. He started there recently. He's based in the Bureau for Development, Democracy, and Innovation. The hub promotes the rights and inclusion of marginalized and underrepresented populations in the development process. So with this summary of Ryan's journey, he truly represents what a young leader can do globally and locally to advance rights, human rights, dignity, and equity for all. Ryan, it is a true honor to know you and to present you on behalf of UNA-NCA with the 2021 Inaugural Emerging Leader Human Rights Award. Congratulations. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paula. And in all those forums and all those spaces, I always know I would find you, and it would be so calming and just know that Paula would be there making impact, and we were working together on all these big challenges before us. I also wanted to extend a huge thank you to the team at UNA-NCA, members of the board, advisory council, Jill Christensen, Andrew, Anna, Christian, Sasha, Mason, and Alex for all the legwork that has gone into this enormously special event. And I want to mention at the outset that Andrew literally went to the awardees' homes to deliver the physical award. this beautiful award in rush hour traffic in Washington, D.C. That, my friends, is simultaneously a violation and achievement of human rights. So thank you very much to Andrew. And thank you to all of you for joining us today, including my family, friends, and colleagues. So once again, my name is Ryan and my pronouns are he, his, him. And it's truly an honor to be with everyone today in my personal capacity. Congratulations as well to the other inspiring awardees. Just to be clear, I completely understand it's hovering around 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, and everyone is excited for the end of the workday and to hop into their evening, so I'll try and be very brief. First, let me just say how humbled I am to be the inaugural recipient of the Emerging Human Rights Leader Award. The thing about this award is that it reminds us that it's never been more important that human rights begin with all of us, and there lies the wisdom of UNA-NCA creating this honor. And I really mean that literally. Jill and Lynn were exactly right when they mentioned that human rights aren't just about big multilateral forums or abstract concepts. They're also begin in our states, our districts, if you will, our neighborhoods, our backyards, and even our very own home. I grew up in the suburbs of Illinois, literally in a town where a video rental store, if you remember those, was across the street from a cornfield. It's changed a bit since then, but you get the picture. And in this context, I remember once being outraged that some residents vocally opposed the construction of a new mosque in town. This led me to publish my very first op-ed that argued in favor of the mosque and condemned the bigotry that was being displayed. I also remember the official registration of a gay-straight alliance at one of my schools somehow being a controversial issue. These experiences are a reminder that human rights is something that each and every one of us should be thinking about and localize. When I previously worked for the UN Association of the USA and UN Foundation, I remember the most impactful, the most clarion, and most serious moments I witnessed at the UN were when emerging voices spoke on human rights. When a young Syrian gay refugee, Subinaz, spoke at the UN Security Council, no one was on their cell phones checking emails or texting. When a young climate justice champion, Greta Thunberg, spoke at the launch of the UN General Assembly, the planet seemingly stopped in its tracks and remembered there are no human rights on a dead planet. When I saw a college activist in Washington, D.C., Jonathan Drumgold, get on a bus at 2 a.m. in the morning to speak on LGBTQI+ human rights at the UN in New York, the ambassador he spoke to listened to his every word. And I'm grateful that a previous UNA-NCA awardee, Dr. Wesley Reiser, decided to open his office door to me at the State Department a few years back, just a few years back, to discuss US leadership at the UN on human rights, even though at the time I was a perfect stranger. And I'm grateful for human rights champions and UNA-NCA friends like Ed Elmendorf, Felice Gare, Mark P. Lagon, Joshua Cooper, and Karen Mulhauser for always making complex topics and issues accessible to me and exploring areas that are ripe for engagement and advocacy. So I hope we can reflect for a second on what is an emerging human rights leader. It's someone that says no matter what title, no matter their professional station, where they're at, they can always work with others to try and spark change. And hearing about the tremendous accomplishments of the other awardees today, I can't emphasize enough that an emerging human rights leader recognizes that there is always room to grow, to learn, and listen to new voices. And I hope this serves to underscore we can and should all be emerging human rights leaders. And UNA-NCA and its outstanding network is a reminder that achieving impact is entirely possible, despite how divided and challenging things can seem now. That's why on my very first week as the Leo Neves Human Rights Fellow, and in my very first meeting in this role, I met with representatives from UNA-NCA to hear from them, to learn from them, and to understand how we can collaborate together. Immediately, this led to organizing events with UNA-NCA and other UNA-USA chapters around the country. Late nights and phone calls that bore the seeds of policy impact from Capitol Hill to the UN, to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs themselves, to empowering grassroots advocates and partners across this country, abroad, joining a very special movement. And now I'm humbled to see what we've done together. Back when we all used to be in the office and I was based in New York, I remember finding out that UNA-NCA's policy recommendations for a major human rights process called the UPR were spotlighted in an official UN report. UNA-NCA aptly focused their inputs on gender and housing equity right here in Washington, D.C. I'm sure just about everyone on this call can imagine this, but I was literally running around the office with the report in my hand, sharing the great news with my coworkers. No doubt the challenges in front of us today are stark, ranging from the 15th year of global democratic backsliding to the cross-cutting red alert impacts of climate change to rampant social inequalities. And horrifically, the international community recently learned that in the last 12-month period, murders of transgender people have spiked 7% globally compared to the last reporting period. And of course, advocacy itself has had to be transformed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. On the fly, we've had to figure out how to achieve impact, accelerate actions, and respond to serious emergencies right from our homes as some of our most cherished public forums shut their doors. Yet it's a reminder again that all of us need to think of ourselves as emerging human rights leaders, seeking to grow new partnerships, build new bridges, and explore new pathways for doing what previously was considered impossible. Growing up, I never would have imagined having the opportunity to be in the basement of the UN at 3 a.m. in the morning, working with other civil society representatives in a crowded room with tired diplomats, secretly scarfing pizza in the UN lobby while the SDGs were being negotiated and eventually adopted by acclamation. I also would not have envisioned going to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva and meeting with LGBTQI+ human rights defenders from around the world. And during the lockdown while in New York, I really didn't consider how I would be waking up my roommates in the early morning hours while on Zoom webinars to discuss how the SDGs could be used to score the world's most influential companies with billions in revenues and millions of employees on human rights. And apologies to those roommates again for waking you up all those days. Today, I'm humbled to be working with colleagues at USAID, across the US government, and with LGBTQI+ activists and change makers around the world to help advance a new vision for global development that is inclusive of LGBTQI+ people and truly leaves no one behind. And make no mistake, there is plenty of work that needs to be done at home as well. The statistics that Sultan shared earlier on LGBTQI+ youth are absolutely heartbreaking. And so my challenge to everyone is to remember that this work, both for human rights and the SDGs, is ongoing and urgent, and that challenges before us require us all to think about emerging solutions, innovations, and ways to break bottlenecks like never before. Perhaps it's fate that this week is the first ever Democracy Summit, and Friday is Human Rights Day, a keen reminder that changing hearts and minds, norms, and policies begins with us all. It also means us all committing to be emerging human rights leaders. For if we are truly emerging, that by definitions means we are always listening, growing, and partnering with others. And nowhere is this more necessary than human rights and the SDGs. USAID Administrator Samantha Power said just yesterday, we all have something to learn about something from someone. In closing, thank you so much again for this award. It's a privilege to learn from each and every one of you, and warm wishes to everyone. Thank you.
And with that, we go to closing words from our CEO of the United Nations Association and President, Paula Boland.
Thank you, Jill. I need my video to be turned on. All right, here we go. Congratulations again, Ryan, for your genuine commitment to public service and to better people's life. You have demonstrated this over 10 years plus of doing a variety of different wonderful activities. I have no doubt that you will continue to make a difference advancing human rights, both locally and globally. And I very much like what you said during your remarks about all of us being emerging leaders in some way and having all an opportunity to make a difference. Okay, we have come to the end of our program, and I hope you all feel as inspired as I am after hearing the incredible journeys of our honorees. This year's Human Rights Day theme relates to equality and Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The principles of equality and non-discrimination are at the heart of human rights. Equality is aligned with the 2030 Agenda and at the heart of sustainable development. This includes addressing and finding solutions for deep-rooted forms of discrimination that have affected the most vulnerable people in societies around the world. Equality, inclusion, and non-discrimination, in other words, a human rights-based approach to development, is the best way to reduce inequalities and resume our path towards achieving the 2030 agenda and achieve a better future for us all. We couldn't get the video message from the Secretary General for this evening, as we do every year. It will be posted tomorrow for Human Rights Day on Friday, but I like to quote. I do have the message from him, and I would like to quote and end by saying, our world is at a crossroads. The COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, and the expansion of digital technology into all areas of our lives have created new threats to human rights. The principles set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights remain the key to realizing all human rights, civil, economic, cultural, social, and political, for all people everywhere. Recovery from the pandemic must be seen as an opportunity to expand human rights and freedoms and to rebuild trust. The United Nations, and I would add, the UN Association and all of our partners stand for the rights of every member of our human family. Today and every day, we will continue to work for justice, equality, dignity, and human rights for all. Remember, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. These words from Martin Luther King Jr. are a reminder that we all have a responsibility to take a stand when we witness injustice. We can make a difference protecting and promoting human rights, and we must try to make a difference. Happy Human Rights Day to you all, and thank you for joining us this evening. Special thanks to our honorees, their guests, presenters, our donors and sponsors for your generosity, our leaders for your vision, and perhaps first and foremost, to my team, led by Andrew Dahl, for all the hard work in putting this program together this evening. Wishing you all a peaceful holiday season and a prosperous 2022. Thank you and good night.